We'll take you through the Edexcel GCSE Paper 2. Paper 2 is split into two different parts, the British Step Study and the Period Study. You'll pick one from each side here. This video is for early Elizabethan England. If you studied anything else that's on the screen now, stop watching because you're wasting your time. I'll go through the 2021 paper for Elizabeth. The front of the paper looks like this. The time you're recommended to take is 55 minutes. And for this exam, a really interesting point is that you have to answer the first two questions and then you get to pick out of the last two here. So question 1C1 or question 1C2. For the purposes of this video, I'm just going to do 1C1 and then I'll show you the mark scheme for 1C2. So here are your questions. Describe two features of the Babington plot, 4 marks, and then it splits it into feature 1 and feature 2. Really simple. Explain why Elizabeth faced challenges in her rule in 1588. And then there's two questions for you there that are worth 16 marks each, so the chunky big questions. So the main cause of war between England and Spain was religious rivalry. How far do you agree? And the leisure activities of the rich and the leisure activities of the poor in early Elizabethan England were very similar. So the first question looks like this. Here's the mark scheme. Describe two features of the Babington plot, and it gives you the year, which is why you don't always have to memorise years in history. And then the question's so simple that all the example can do is give the examiners possible things that candidates might write about. So here's my example that will get 4 out of 4. The Babington plot was a plan to assassinate Elizabeth I by a group of English Catholics and replace her with her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. 1 mark. Mary, Queen of Scots had a direct and clear claim to the throne, and she was Catholic. 2 marks. Second feature. Babington wrote to Mary, Queen of Scots, and informed her about the proposed plot. As Mary was closely monitored, the letters were intercepted and read by Walsingham. This plot led to Mary's eventual execution. So that there, 4 out of 4, there isn't much to say. Unfortunately, this question, you either know it or you don't. If you didn't know anything about the Babington plot, try putting things in there about general plots. So if I go back, the Babington plot was a plan to assassinate Elizabeth I. All 4 of the plots you have to study were plans to assassinate Elizabeth I. Just write it down if something comes there. Spain is often also involved in the plots. That's another good one to write down there if you're out of things to write about. Here's the second question. Explain why Elizabeth faced challenges in her rule in 1588. Some things to notice about this question. The target for examiners giving you marks, AO2, your analysis, your explanation of causes. Explain why Elizabeth faced challenges to her rule. That's a cause question. That is given 6 marks. And then your knowledge, your recall of facts gets you 6 marks. If you're struggling with the year of in your exam paper, so it says there in 1588, and you're sitting there thinking, oh my God, what happened in 1588? Go back to the front of your exam paper, and you'll see on the front it says early Elizabethan England 1558 to 1588. So I know from looking at the front that this exam question is targeting when Elizabeth first came to the throne. Now, so you think back to when Elizabeth first came to the throne, she just took over from Mary, her sister, who was a Catholic. I've already got something to write about. So don't panic when there are dates in questions like this. Go back to the front, have a look. This is what the mark scheme for this question looks like. And you'll notice there, you have to go beyond the stimulus points, which is these 2 bullet points. So it's giving you the question, and then it's saying, for this question, you could write about these 2 things. And you can't get into the level 4 bracket if you haven't gone beyond the stimulus points. So as a rule of thumb, we say for every 4 marks, that's 1 paragraph. This question is worth 12 marks, so we're looking for 3 paragraphs. So this is how you set your 3 paragraphs out. Point, evidence, explain, link it back to the question, and then just do that 3 times. So here's my example for this, and I'll just talk through it. So some English Catholics question the legitimacy of Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I's legitimacy was in doubt because how her father had divorced his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, in order to marry Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn. Committed Catholics refused to acknowledge Henry's divorce because the Pope had not agreed to it. Catherine of Aragon was alive when Elizabeth was born, so not everyone had accepted that Elizabeth was legitimate. Further, when Anne Boleyn was executed for treason, Henry VIII himself declared Elizabeth illegitimate and excluded her from succession. However, he later reversed this decision, and now I'm linking it back to the question. So therefore, Elizabeth faced the challenge of legitimacy as her place on the throne was questionable for several different reasons, particularly to Catholics. Great paragraph. Next one. The second challenge was religion. Really clear point. Let's have some evidence, some examples of why religion was a problem. Her predecessor, Mary I, had ruled the country as a Catholic. Mary I, a Protestant, needed to reverse Catholic reforms without sparking rebellion. Given Elizabeth's questionable foundations as a legitimate monarch in the eyes of the Catholic population, this was not an easy task. While the religious settlement was published in 1559, the challenge presented itself as soon as Elizabeth became monarch. Elizabeth I, therefore, walked a tightrope between forcing her Protestant will upon Catholics and behaving more moderately to prevent rebellion. Therefore, a significant challenge for Elizabeth I was religion, and at the end there I've linked it back to the question. Final paragraph. Elizabeth I inherited a weak financial situation. Elizabeth I's government did not have a lot of money as England had fought costly wars before she became queen, and lots of crown lands had been sold off to raise money to fight them. And look at that, I didn't say as Mary I had fought wars, or as Edward or as Henry VIII. I can't remember the wars, so there I just put as England had fought costly wars. So this prevented Elizabeth from earning money from land rent. When she took the throne, the crown was £300,000 in debt. While Elizabeth I ruled by divine right, she needed money to do so. As a result, she had to call Parliament to grant taxation, which undermined her power, especially as a female monarch. Therefore, money was a challenge to Elizabeth, as she could not exercise power independently. And that there is nice and wrapped up. And if you look at the chronological flow of it, legitimacy, so that's always been there, like the long-term challenge. Second, her predecessor, what her predecessor had done. And then she's on the throne now, she hasn't got much money. The second question is, how far do you agree? And for this question, it's really debatable how you set it out. But this is how I want you to think of it in your head. An introduction, 2 paragraphs to agree, 2 paragraphs to disagree, and then a conclusion. And I'll show you in a minute the reason why I want you to do an introduction and a conclusion. So the question, the main cause of the war between England and Spain was religious rivalry. How far do you agree? 2 stimulus points. Now, what's really interesting to note is that the assessment objective 2 is worth more in this question than the knowledge you can recall. So it's about your explanation of the second order concept, whatever that is. And for this example, it's causation. So what caused the war between England and Spain? Was it religious rivalry? So again, for this question, you must go beyond the stimulus points because it's capped. But the reason that I've asked you to do an introduction and conclusion, if we go down to the level 4 bracket here, it says an analytical explanation is given, which is directed consistently at the conceptual focus of the question, showing a line of reason that is coherent, sustained, and logically structured. So for something to be coherent and sustained, it has to be all the way throughout your answer. It needs to be referenced throughout your answer. And a really good way to do that is to frame it with an introduction and a conclusion. So here's my example, and I've put them in the boxes quite crudely here, but it's really useful to think of it in your head in this way. So let's start with the introduction. The main cause of war between England and Spain was religious rivalry. England's religious settlement and the Pope's excommunication of Elizabeth confirmed England as a firm Protestant country. While England's involvement in the Netherlands and commercial rivalry, including piracy, are examples of rivalry that were not religious, there were religious undertones to them. So there, I've answered the question, I've laid out my argument really clearly. It was religion that was the main cause of war. So, first paragraph to agree. And it doesn't matter if you do 2 to agree, 2 to disagree. You could do agree, disagree. But I think just for consistency, do 2 to agree, then 2 to disagree. So, Elizabeth's religious settlement made it clear that she and her country were Protestant. While there were geographical divisions, religious divisions in England, Elizabeth's three-part religious settlement sidelines Catholicism. The Pope was not head of the Church, the Bible was written in English, and sins were only forgiven by God. Spain, therefore, saw Elizabeth as a heretic. This religious division, via the religious settlement, set the foundation for ongoing disputes. Next paragraph. So the Pope issued a bull excommunicating Elizabeth from the Catholic Church. The Pope also called on all loyal Catholics to depose of Elizabeth, Internally, this sparked a series of rebellions. Externally, it also legitimised the involvement of Catholic forces in internal rebellions. Spain was involved in the plot organised by Ridolfi, but also Throckmorton and Babington. Therefore, the Spanish threat provided the backdrop to many internal rebellions. And again there, I am agreeing and then linking it back to the question. So let's go to disagree. England was directly involved in the war with the Netherlands. Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, even took the title Governor-General. As the Netherlands belonged to the Spanish since the 16th century, this was direct involvement in Spanish affairs. While this did create tension, the undertones of the interference was religion. The Netherlands was a Protestant country, and so was England. They were natural allies because of their religion. Therefore, while the involvement in Elizabeth isn't directly religion, much of the reason Elizabeth got involved was religion. Finally, commercial rivalry was also a cause of war, as English privateers stole vast amounts from Spanish sailors. English settlers in the New World attacked Spanish ports and treasure fleets. The English also began to challenge the Spanish slave trade by taking away business. The knighting of Drake was confirmation that these attacks were supported by Elizabeth. This created further tension. While there are external factors, so now I'm going to the conclusion. While there are external factors outside of religion, such as the involvement in the Netherlands and commercial rivalry, religious rivalry underpins the reasons that relations between England and Spain deteriorated. Therefore, it is accurate to say that the main reason for war was religion. So this is what the mark scheme looks like. You get marks for and marks against. And really importantly, it says there the fourth mark in each level is allocated to Blue Point 3 and should be considered independently of award of other marks. So you need to be really, really careful there about the information that you include in your answer. So, final question. I'm not going to show you the answer, but this is the mark scheme there. So the leisure activities of the poor in early Elizabethan England were very rich, similar to the rich. And then there are two examples there. And then it just gives same thing, by the way. You have to go beyond the stimulus points. And look at the third bullet point that it was talking about. The overall judgment is missing. The overall judgment. So it's always about the overall judgment throughout there. So be really careful about the information you include. And like I did for this question, make sure that if you're disagreeing it with something else, you also show a reason to agree. And that's just for the people that are going to get into level 4, by the way. So this bit here, the people that are looking at 8s or 9 grades. So the indicative guidance is here. So relevant points to support this statement that the leisure activities were very similar is both rich and poor attended the theatre. Gambling was a popular pastime at all levels of society. People of all classes enjoyed making and listening to music. And then to counter that, so the other side of the argument, we could say the rich enjoyed sports such as tennis or bowls, which required specialist equipment, while the poor enjoyed sports such as football and running. So I always think of it as the poor will enjoy stuff that is cheap, and the rich people enjoy stuff that takes more money. So, for example, learning an instrument. So wealthy people were usually better educated and therefore enjoy pastimes such as chess, literature and poetry.